For me, the transition between elementary school and middle school was a painful one. I started feeling anxious about friends, about how I looked, what others thought of me, and how I did or did not fit in. My mind raced with thoughts of I'm ugly, I'm stupid, no one likes me, I'm worthless. This would keep me up at night, and I often struggled to sleep. My appetite drastically decreased. I no longer felt like playing sports, hanging out with friends, or doing just about anything. I spent a lot of time alone. I started to have this panic that I wasn't a good person and I didn't belong anywhere, and there was nothing I could do about it. These thoughts continued and just got worse. When I made it into high school, I started thinking about killing myself, and I tried it a lot. I absolutely hated myself and thought I would be doing everyone a favor by killing myself. This went on throughout my teens and 20s. I spiraled lower and lower as my behavior got more harmful and detrimental to myself. At 35, I hit suicidal crisis and came close to ending my life, so close that it really scared me. My life was spared that day, but I knew that I needed to make some big changes. Shortly after this crisis, I met someone who showed up in a whole new way. He deeply listened and didn't judge me or my pain. He didn't try to fix it. He didn't try to change me. He accepted me, wounds and all. And then, for the first time in over 20 years, I was able to speak my truth and say out loud, I think about killing myself. And in sharing my truth, I was on the road to recovery and freedom. There was a lot I didn't know during those 23 years. I didn't know that I was experiencing symptoms of depression. I didn't know I had a mental illness. I didn't know it was treatable. I didn't know it wasn't my fault. And I didn't know I wasn't alone. Helping others to understand these things is at the heart of Speak Up, Reach Out. I joined the coalition in 2010 because I didn't want anyone to suffer in silence without hope the way that I had for so long. I wanted to help make this road less painful and scary for others. This is what we do at Speak Up, Reach Out. Through education, training, and hope, we spread the message that you're not alone, recovery is possible, and it does get better. Understanding, awareness, non-judgmental listening, and loving saved my life. It's my mission in working with Speak Up, Reach Out to pay this gift forward and to share throughout our community.
If we can't talk about mental health, if we can't talk about depression, anxiety, suicide, that means that people hide that, and it makes people not be able to do things like seek treatment. We reduce stigma. What that really means is we're talking about mental health as health. We really are a grassroots initiative, and we came about because of the incredible support of our community. We also look to the municipalities and the organizations and companies in our town to really help get mental health programming into the people. We have a scholarship program where people who can't afford therapy for whatever reason, it's because you have a high deductible or it's just not in your budget right now, but we can connect them with up to 12 sessions of therapy for free, and it's a life changer.
People will come up to me and they'll say, you made a real difference in my life. And that is so rewarding, and that tells me that we're affecting change in our community.
We recognize that here in Summit County, it can be a very isolating environment. Winters are long and dark. We have created community connectedness events. They're small format events. It could be everything from a cooking class to an art class to a walk in the woods. But at those classes, you're always going to be introduced to building hope. You're going to get some opportunities and learn some tips and tricks for managing your own mental health. And most importantly, you're going to have opportunities to connect with other people in the community. Building Hope is awesome. I have an incredible staff, and it is because of how much everyone cares deeply about the community and this cause. It makes our work so effective in the community.
I am a Breckenridge native. I am here because my son, who also grew up here in Breckenridge, took his own life in April. And I'm here to talk a little bit about his story, about what we saw, and how that's affected us as a family and as a community. Toby came into the world. Toby means bringer of light. ironically enough, he's the one that couldn't see the light. He was a very happy little boy, very active, perpetual motion. He was involved in athletics. He played hockey, lacrosse. He skied, both cross country and alpine. He played basketball. He played baseball. He not only played many of those sports, he reffed and umpired and mentored other kids. Recently had become a pretty avid kayaker. So very enthusiastic about the outdoors and activity and motion. We often teased that his brain was not engaged if he was not somehow moving. He was a very sweet, loving little boy, and a sweet, loving teen too, for the most part. He was a people pleaser. He liked to make the people around him happy. And in some ways that definitely played into his decision to take his life by the struggle between trying to please his parents and be considered a good kid with the adults in his life, and also wanting to please his friends and go out and play, go out and sneak out, drink, vape. We know that he was smoking marijuana. And not that it was anything that any teenage person does was awful, but we know that that was part of his personality. We know that he had gone down that path and was influenced by friends. Best smile. He had dimples in both cheeks, and many of the comments and things we saw talked about how his smile would light up the room and bring comfort and smiles to the rest of the room. Whether that was to a newcomer or whether that was to just the classroom in general. He was often smiling, showing us those dimples. Girlfriends, he had many. He was a very handsome boy, bright, beautiful, athletic. We found as Toby came into teenagehood, we teased 13 was a lot like 3. We started seeing some hormonal changes and some things that were different with him. Emotional outbursts, screaming why, right? We often hear about that with the toddlers. And as teens, he kind of started to revisit that and pulled away from mom and dad a little bit to go do what his friends were doing, to fit in with the group. Toby often said that he felt like a misfit, which most of his friends and people around him thought, how could you feel like a misfit? You fit in everywhere. I had one of his friends tell me after the fact that Toby hit his freshman year and he knew somebody in every group in every grade and fit in every group in every grade as a freshman. But his perception was, as most of ours is, that he was a misfit, that he had to do these things that maybe he wasn't comfortable doing to fit in. And often in our arguments, especially prior to his death, he would say things like, you think I'm a failure, because we would fight about, I know you were doing these things. You snuck out last night, or we found your pipe, or we found, and it really made him feel like somehow he wasn't a good kid. But he was. And we often said, you're not a failure. But we know these things you're choosing will get in your way of success. If you're working really hard, but you've got strikes against you, it gets into the legal system, etc., you're going to have a really hard time getting into the college you want to go to. You're going to have a really hard time getting the scholarships. You're going to have a really hard time paying for your auto insurance, because those decisions affect all of those things. And I think as parents, we come from that stance of trying to protect them, trying to teach them without making the mistakes themselves, because we've seen it, we've done it, We know people who have experienced it. And we just want what's best for our babies. I didn't think he was a bad kid, but he felt that way. And it wasn't all the time, but in arguments he would bring it up. And that goes back to our perception, right? He didn't hear, I don't want you to make these choices because they're bad for you. He heard, you're a failure because you're making these choices. And even that night, in the argument prior to, he said, Mom, you think I'm a failure? And I said, no, honey, I don't. I think that if you keep making these choices to do drugs, to sneak out, to lie, it's going to get in your way. And he seemed to understand. But that was often the case with arguments. He would get very worked up, and then by the time the argument was over, we'd have our smiling, happy guy, and we'd move forward and move into something else. A lot of the signs and symptoms that we would have been seeing and recognizing, we were able to easily write off as just being part of being a teen. Feeling like a failure. What teenager doesn't at some point? Feeling depressed and sad. What teen doesn't at some point? Lack of sleep. Our argument that night was oversleep. He had snuck out the night before, we didn't even know it. But we did hear him and his sister arguing at 4 o'clock in the morning. And we had decided that we were going to instill a bedtime with electronics turned in at bedtime. He came home from work. How many kids do you know during a pandemic go out for a walk and come home with a job? That was Toby. Literally, hey Mom, can I go for a walk? And came home from the walk and said, Mom, I got a job. And he did. He got a job bagging groceries at City Market. He was working that night. When he came home, his dad and I, while he was eating, sat down and said, we've been talking. We're going to take electronics and instill a bedtime because it's really bad for all of us to be sleep deprived. When we don't sleep, it does things to our body that aren't good. It does things to our mind that aren't good. And Toby argued, you've got to let me keep my phone. And we tried to reason with him. We tried to say, research shows electronics get in your way of a good night's sleep. We're going to set standards because that also is known to help you sleep. And he kept saying, you don't know what you're doing to me. And we kept going, well, if you can give us a valid reason, we can talk about it. But he couldn't. If he had been well rested and we'd had the same argument, he might still be here. If he had not snuck out the night before and wasn't feeling as conflicted between parents and friends, he might still be here. And then add on top of it the pandemic. He died 5 weeks in. The first wave of reopening was 2 days after. And he often said to us, I'm not doing well. This isn't good for me. I need to get out and see my friends. And we said, well, you've got electronic contact with your friends. All the research is showing even going out with just one person can cause a chain reaction. Think about your grandparents, all 4 of whom live within an hour's drive. Yeah, you could probably get it and be okay, but they wouldn't. And we can't chance that exposure. And I feel that that's probably a good 50%. If we were not under these extraordinary circumstances, he'd be here today. You know, all those little things after the fact, you go, okay, yeah, he was exhausted, he'd been out partying, he probably was doing drugs. The night before, he'd had 3 concussions during his sport history. That can't be glossed over as not being part of this. Many people have said it probably played a factor. It's not the only thing. He had a lot of things that all came together in a perfect storm. And we'll never know if changing one of those things would have saved him. But come to find out that probably the reason he fought so hard for his phone that night is that Toby died on 4/20. And we were not thinking about that, but we knew that he was involved in a culture that was using marijuana. And there probably was a party, and he was probably trying to figure out how he was going to get to go if we took all of his electronics away, how he was going to know where and when and how. And the last thing he said to me, I just had this feeling I needed to go hug him, and I did. And rather than standing up like he normally did, he just scooted to the front of the bed. And I wrapped my arms around him. And he said, "Mom, I just don't know what to do." I didn't know. I didn't know to ask him if he was feeling suicidal. I didn't know to ask him to clarify. I don't remember what I said to him. He had started to calm down and he seemed to be okay. And I went and got in the bath. While I was in the bath, I heard some bumping in his room. His father came in to brush his teeth, and I asked, "Is Toby still in his room?" Because I thought maybe he was leaving, and that was the bumping. And his dad said, "As far as I know, unless he snuck out the window." I finished my bath, I got out, and I went into his room to see if he wanted to get into the bath to calm down. And I found him. I called for my husband. We performed CPR. The paramedics came, cut one of my favorite jackets off of him, and the AED said, "No shock advised." Looking back, we know he was gone by the time I got in there. His death certificate does say the ER, but the time of death is about the time the paramedics arrived on scene. Total of 3 minutes. By the time that knocking around had stopped, my baby was gone. Suicide affects everyone. That my kiddo was not showing incredible signs that this is what he was planning. And most of the signs that he was showing could be explained as being an average teenager. Yes, he was showing some restlessness and he was having some difficulty sleeping, and he would have some bouts of anger, especially aimed at his little sister. But most teenagers do. When he would say that he wasn't dealing well with the pandemic and the isolation, we asked him, "Do you want to see somebody? Do you want to talk to somebody? It could help." And he would say no. And I have friends that have done it and it doesn't do any good. And We know that counseling only works if you're willing to partake, and so we allowed him to stay out of counseling. But I went. And even talking to my counselor and telling her all the things that were going on in our arguments and things he was saying and things he was doing, it didn't raise any red flags for her either. He was a pretty normal teen. The pain has stopped for Toby, but it will never go away. For the rest of us that he is left behind. And if only he had gotten some sleep, if only he had decided one way or another to go to the party or not go to the party, right? Any number of those things, little decisions, would have kept him here. And we all feel like misfits sometimes. Don't ignore your friends. Don't ignore your teens. Talk to them. We talked to him. I talked to him about suicide a couple times. He actually stole my van in January to go out and help a friend who was feeling suicidal. We had a long conversation about why keeping him on the phone and finding a way to turn the kid in would have been more successful than driving to him and putting his own emotional body at risk, driving at night in that turmoil, and letting the friend off the phone. That friend was hospitalized that same night by his parents. That friend followed him 9 days later. We found out after the fact that Toby was part of a pact. It was told to us by the third child, who is still struggling to stay here with us. Toby was smart. He hid from most everybody who would have gotten in his way his true feelings. Yet he talked about and planned with 2 other people. The pact came to light when I talked to both the police officer and the coroner and said, he has 2 friends that have both been hospitalized twice for suicide ideas. And finally, the third child did admit that they did have a pact. I don't know how he went from trying to save his friend to being intimately part of it to being the first one to go. Toby didn't realize what a leader he was. And it scares me that so many other people think that maybe that could be an example to be followed. He had a lot of really redeeming qualities, but that decision was not one to be followed. That the pain you leave behind is forever. And there's always hope. So many people loved him. So many people cared. So many beautiful notes and stories after the fact. Tell your friends now. We're not good enough at telling our friends and the people around us how much we love them and what they mean to us. Make it uncomfortable. Because you never know when they need to hear it. And don't be quiet about it. Don't get drawn in. Don't be a part of a pact. Be the one to stand up, get help, because a mad friend is so much better than a dead friend. And we need to do a better job of educating, of destigmatizing, of talking about it, on making it where suicide is as much of the curriculum as sex and drugs. where the kids are rolling their eyes, not again. We're not talking about this again. Because it wasn't the adults in his life that he confided in. It was the kids. They need the tools to be able to help each other. And I am going to continue to fight. I won't quit fighting for the potential Tobys out there. Because it's not okay. I hope his example can save somebody else rather than pulling them down that path. That his memory will help others. And that by the pain and the shock that he left behind can maybe save somebody else who felt like maybe that was a solution. Hopefully it already has. But I can't let him lead that way. I need for him to be a reason why people go, my life's okay. If he thought things were that bad, and we know they weren't for him, we looked up to him. He was loved by everyone. Then maybe I need to look and see what I'm not seeing right. What perceptions do I have wrong? I'm here. You need to talk? I'm here. Call me. Because I would rather spend some time talking to somebody who maybe is feeling like they could have done more. Or is maybe feeling like they want to go down that path. I am always here. And it's important to know that just as we missed any signs, friends felt guilty and things for that too. We couldn't have known. He was smart enough to make sure we didn't. And that he will live on in our memories. We will have a service someday. Listen, talk, and I'm always available.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Erin, Ivie, and I'm the Executive Director for Speak Up, Reach Out, which is the Suicide Prevention Coalition in Eagle County. Our mission is to prevent suicide through training, awareness, and hope. And we are so blessed to be here tonight to support Building Hope Summit County and the Summit County community as we have this discussion around suicide loss, prevention, and awareness. I really want to thank Heather for sharing her story. Sharing the stories of lived experience with suicide intensity and suicide loss is so incredibly important in reducing the stigma related to suicide and mental health. I want to take a moment of silence to remember those that we have lost to suicide, including Toby, Heather's son, and Dustin, Nancy's son, one of our other panelists. If you'd like, please take the time to put the loved one's name that you would like to remember tonight in the chat, and we'll take just a moment to remember these lives that we've lost. Thank you. Thank you all so much. I know that many of you in attendance tonight are here because you too have lost a loved one to suicide, or you're here to support Heather and anybody else in the Summit County community that is struggling with this loss. We hope that tonight the panelists will be able to give you a little bit of understanding and support. Please continue to use the chat throughout the night to communicate with one another, connect, and to support one another. But if you have questions, please use the Q&A, which is in the bottom of the Zoom screen below the panel's videos. And we'll go through those questions and answer them. I'm gonna go now to introducing all of our panelists. If you wouldn't mind just waving as I go through this. We're gonna start, everybody's probably gonna get an opportunity to answer some questions. We hope that this will be a lively discussion. We want to talk about this subject. Everybody that's here really wants to share with you their knowledge and their experience. So Jennifer McAtamney with Building Hope is the executive director. Heather Gard, who was featured in our video, is one of our lost survivor panelists. Nancy Kerry is the Frisco town manager and a resident who lost her 34-year-old son to suicide. Dr. Casey Wolfington is the Clinical Services Director for Eagle Valley Behavioral Health. And Connor Carton is the Summit County School District social worker and coordinates internal and external mental health needs and resources within the Summit's secondary schools level. He also serves as the liaison with Summit County's mental health partners. Before we get started with our Q&A, I just want to remind everybody, if you do still need interpretation and you haven't figured it out yet, at the bottom of the screen, there's a small globe that says interpretation. Click on that and you can have Spanish interpretation. And as I noted in the chat earlier, if you are needing help or really feel like you need support while we're having this conversation, Kellen is available if you want to private message her. Or you can text TALK to 38255 and that will get you support through Colorado Crisis Services. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and start our discussion. I want to start by asking Heather, and then we'll go to Nancy. What was one of the most helpful and least helpful things that people said or did in the days after you lost your loved ones to suicide? I think it's so incredibly important for people in the community to understand how they can support someone who has lost a loved one to suicide. So Heather, I'll start with you.
I think one of the most helpful things is just to be present. Listen, be physically present, call in, check in, even if the survivor is not able to respond. They do see that you are there for them. I think one of the least helpful things is in our society, we are kind of trained to fix it, get through the grief, move on, that there's a time frame. Even just well-meaning words such as "at least he didn't," or "you can do this," or "he wouldn't want you to feel this way," or "don't feel this way because it doesn't do any good." The fixing doesn't stop the brain from going to those places, but it doesn't necessarily make you feel supported either. So really just acknowledge the person and their loss and try not to fix it.
Nancy, how about for you?
Hi, and first, I just want to say, Heather, thank you for your bravery and for also being present for Toby and for sharing that story. It means a lot. You are making a difference. I think the most helpful thing, I would agree with everything Heather said, of course, but I think helpful is really, don't be afraid of saying anything. It was very helpful, no matter what you say. Like, you cannot, as Heather just said, you can't make it worse. You can't really make it better. So don't worry, just say something. And it's okay to say anything. Don't expect even now. I don't necessarily respond to everything people say, but I too hear it. I wouldn't want to discourage anyone that from trying to say something. I think it is really helpful to even now let me talk about Dusty. I know it's uncomfortable for others, but it's great to be able to say, oh, Dusty, he really loved this or that without people sort of shrieking inside. And that's really helpful to me. There is also in our sort of society, there's a long-standing practice of sort of blaming the person and calling them selfish. And I had very, very good friends who will still today, out of defense for me, say, he was just so selfish to do that to you. Come on. I don't want you to be afraid of saying anything, but maybe don't blame Dusty. I have a different perspective.
Thank you both so much. I think it's incredibly important for people to know that it's okay to ask questions and support your loved ones. Jen, I'm going to come to you next. There's a question about if there are support groups for suicide and trauma survivors, and if not, is it possible to organize one?
At Building Hope, one of our specialties is really being nimble and responsive. So this fall, working with Heather, we really realized there was a need for new grief support. And so we created a grief group we have one for adolescents and one for adults. So those are ongoing. If the community is interested in a specific group for suicide survivors, we can work with Kellen, who's here, to match up with a therapist and be able to put that together. And we would be happy to do that.
Wonderful. Dr. Wolfington, I want to come to you next, and I want to talk a little bit about survivor guilt and what that is and how people might experience that and what we can do to navigate that if that's happening for someone here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Erin. One of the things that happens when we experience any type of trauma is that we try to have some level of control. And one of the ways that we control things is to blame. We talked about blaming others, blaming, the person who has died, and sometimes blaming ourselves. And part of the way that self-blame can really manifest is the survivor guilt, is thinking about all the different reasons that you should have been in a position rather than him, or feeling about all of the things that when we're looking back at something, hindsight is 20/20, that you start to rack your brain that if I would have done this, I would have done this. And again, I think that psychologically it becomes this piece where we're just trying to have control over so many things in our life that are beyond our control. And I think, Heather did a beautiful job in that video of talking about it is incredibly rare in life, in any circumstance, that one event leads to another. It's really never 2 + 2 = 4. It's a real incredible mix of complexity. And it's really important to recognize that when we're having blame, guilt, shame. And I think all of it's part of the healing process.
Thank you so much. Connor, I'm going to come to you next. I want to have you talk a little bit about what resources are available within the school district, how individuals that are attending school, but also parents, can access the resources to support someone who might be considering suicide, but also as we navigate this season in the pandemic and the district having lost a couple of different students, if they're dealing with grief and not feeling like they're doing that as well as they could.
Certainly, and thank you, Erin, and Heather, thank you as well, again, for sharing your story and for sharing some of Toby's story as well. There's so much power in just communicating and hearing and in starting to get rid of that stigma. One of the biggest things that we want to focus on as a district is our prevention, because that's where we feel like we can have a lot of power in what we do. So we do have social emotional curriculum that starts at the preschool level and moves all the way up through our secondary level. In elementary school, it really looks more like, how do you have coping skills? How do you build healthy relationships? Kind of focusing on just how do you kind of become a healthy human being. And then in middle school and high school, we do start to get into more of the suicide awareness, talking about suicide, talking about serious mental health conditions like depression and anxiety and the effects that that can have on students, as well as on families, because we know that we're not, you know, the only people seeing those students and seeing your children, but it's a combined effort. And we really want to work with our community members, with our parents, to really be on top of that awareness piece as much as we can. The other big side of it is intervention in the moment. So if we have students that do feel at a heightened state of crisis or are dealing with some of those intense feelings around depression and anxiety, we've trained all of our staff to be aware of and be able to respond to those changes in behavior or those actions that come up from those students. And then we also have mental health professionals in all schools that are ready to perform an assessment, call for additional help, and just really be there with those students in that moment as well. In terms of the parents and students being able to access those resources, I know this year in particular, we've tried really hard to make sure that they're available. We tried to communicate those resources out in newsletters from a district level as well as from a school level, and just make students aware, make families aware that we do have counseling services. We do have the potential to really intervene and step in. And you know, our biggest goal is that every student has at least one trusted relationship with an adult, you know, that they have one person at least that they can go to and really have that strong connection with, that can really guide them through some of these hard times as well.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm going to come back to Heather and Nancy. There's a couple questions. I'm going to try to lump them together a little bit. One is, and same thing, I'll have Heather answer and then Nancy if you want to follow. Someone says, I had a hard time answering the question, how are you doing? Her answer was, I've never done this before, so I don't really know how I'm doing. How do others answer that question?
Yeah, that's a question that we hear every day in our lives, and after a loss becomes a very loaded question. In my conversations with other survivors, etc., that's the hardest part, answering how are you? Because you're not good, but you can't really say I'm not good because that's not what society is looking for. I've kind of gone to the I'm managing, I'm moving forward. But really, it's a very difficult question that we ask without thinking about.
Nancy, as you answer that question, do you mind also sharing maybe how that's changed for you over the years, since it's been a little bit longer since you lost your son?
Mm-hmm. It's true. In the beginning, I almost feel like that question is, there's no answer. Of course, I'm not doing well. And I'm not sure people ask it so they don't really mean that. They really mean what, and so go ahead and ask, how are you doing? How are you dealing with the fact that Dusty died? How are you coping with Toby's loss? Be specific if that's what you want to ask. And it's okay to ask because it's on our minds every minute. My son died 7.5 years ago, and I can tell you that there isn't a day that it's still not obviously on my mind, but I know that people don't know that. And so today, if someone asks, hey, how you doing? I know they're just asking, how am I doing today? There are moments and times, and I don't know what to call them, anniversary dates and things like that, that are very difficult. And I'm better at saying, I need some time alone because this is a day that really mattered a lot to us with my son. So I'm better at also saying, I'm just going to put this out there that I need a little bit. And then people are more clear about understanding where I'm at. Those first couple of years, it's just raw every minute of every day. You know, as time goes on, the rawness is replaced with kind of a grappling reality that there's a lot Dusty lost in life, and there's a lot we miss as a result of him not being here. It's shocking still how much we miss, how much he misses. That loss doesn't change. You learn to carry it with you.
I couldn't agree more with that. Jen, I want to ask you about programs that are being implemented by Building Hope. There's a specific question about the Hope Squad and if anyone has looked into this program or learning more about it as far as either a community program or implementing within the schools.
So Casey might be able to answer questions about the Hope Squad. That's a Eagle County program, but it sounds like an amazing thing. I'd love to learn more about it here. In terms of resources, you know, the Building Hope website is always a great place to start. You can find a searchable provider database there. You can find support groups. You can find tips for self-care and self-share. And most importantly, you can find the Colorado crisis phone number and text number for someone who is in crisis. I am a big believer that when you see someone struggling, it's super okay to ask those hard questions, ask why you're struggling. It's not always the simple question is, are you okay? I have two daughters, one 18 and one 20. And 2 years ago, our eldest was having very bad suicidal ideation and came and asked for help. And so I learned then to ask her every day if she was thinking about suicide. And it was the hardest question a mom could ever ask, but it gave great power and it opened up that conversation and it gave her a space to talk about it and gave me space to know that she was going to be safe on that day, at that moment, in that time. I think, you know, this community has worked really hard over the last few years to really improve our mental health system. Kids, remember, you can get help at school. We have amazing people like Connor, but we also have the care clinic and school-based health with behavioral health therapy that is available for you. There is therapy out in the community. Building Hope has a scholarship program that we talked about where we can connect you with up to 12 sessions of therapy for free if you don't have insurance or don't have a way of paying for that. And as young people, the age of consent in Colorado is 12. And so even if I hope that parents are supportive of this, but sometimes it's a place that kids aren't ready to go, but you can get help for yourself and bring your parents in when you're ready. It's always better when the whole family is involved in that conversation and knows what's going on. But you know what? It's better if you know you need help, go get it and take that power for yourself and know that you can do that. Those are some things I think that are really incredible. Building Hope is working on a new program, which is called, it's going to be an informal peer program. We're hoping to launch it in late November, where people will be able to call Building Hope when we're not open, and we'll have trained peers to answer those calls, hold space with people, have those conversations, help you connect with the resources that you need at that time. Those are just some of the community supports that are available. The other thing, we continue to build new groups. We've had not only are we building groups around grief and support and anger, but we have right now with the pandemic, it's really hard for people and people are struggling. And so one of the things, we have a generous grant from the Summit Foundation, and we can create what are called Connect and Reflect Cafes. These are just virtual spaces organized around cohorts of employees, or it could be around Summit County moms even, or other kind of, inherent groups where you can be connected with a therapist and have space to process the trauma that everyone's going through, the stress of knowing winter's coming and being worried about possibly having our community closed down and our health and the health of our loved ones. So these are just important places where people have the opportunity to share those feelings and also get the support and learn new tools for managing those thoughts and being able to process everything you're going through. That was a pretty general answer, but I hope that gave you some inspiration.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. I think it's really important to remember too that organizations like Building Hope are always looking at how they can better serve the community and developing their program. I think Building Hope does a great job of that. Because Jen deferred a little bit to Casey on Hope Squad, I want to give you an opportunity to share what your thoughts are on the program.
Yes, absolutely. So Hope Squad is an amazing peer-to-peer school-based program that really trains students to be able to have the skills to ask these questions, to intervene, and then to refer to the appropriate resources. And, Hope Squad is one of these avenues of training. But, Erin actually is moderating this, but Speak Up, Reach Out in Eagle County provides a lot of these trainings, question per se, persuade, respond, and a number of other trainings that are available to our entire community. One positive thing that really has come from COVID is a lot of things that had to be in person are now available in a virtual platform. And I think even with regard to COVID and the virtual offerings, the groups that are available through Building Hope in Summit County, we can make those available and you have people access them in Eagle County. And Building Hope and EVBH work so hand in hand with so many of our projects, our programs, our strategic planning for behavioral health initiatives. And so if you hear about one thing and you live on the other part of this path, reach out to Jen and I, and we will make sure that it's accessible to you.
Great, thanks, Casey. Connor, one other question is, and I think that Jen touched on this a little bit. There's a question about how the school district is encouraging peer-to-peer support, since we know so many times kids aren't really relying on their adults in their life. They're sharing stuff with one another, and what ways the school district is supporting that or training students to make sure that they have those tools.
Definitely. And I think this is a cool area that's really started to come out more recently, is this idea of the peer-to-peer support and really getting some national funding for programs. And so as a district, we are actually looking at a couple of programs right now to implement within the high school. One is Sources of Strength, and another is Teen Mental Health First Aid. And these both have components that really encourage students to be aware of each other and kind of build that ability to, really ask a peer, ask a friend, hey, are you okay? Is something wrong? Can I get you help? Can I get you resources? And give them the knowledge to understand how to access that help and how to access those resources as well. We do know that students, they're going to confide more with one another. I'm not too far out of high school. I know myself, and that was me. I wanted to talk with my friends, and if I had stuff going on, that was where I wanted to share those things. And so we really want to lean into that and recognize that, and we want to implement that for sure within our high school. And then in our middle school too, we are doing Signs of Suicide, which is a program that, again, encourages students to just be aware that these feelings can come up and that it's okay, and that we can also respond to them and treat them and help them feel better as well. So we're getting ready to do that, hopefully this next semester, the video, giving that kind of guidance. And then from there, we also have exit tickets. So the idea is that students can then say, hey, maybe I'm worried about a friend, or maybe I'm worried about myself, and really get some help in that moment.
Great, thanks, Connor. We've had great success with the Signs of Suicide program in Eagle County, so good luck. Nancy, have you found that there's a specific group or event that has been valuable to you in support as you've navigated your loss journey?
The American Foundation for Suicide Prevention was really helpful to our family in the first couple of years. We did a lot of the Walk Out of Darkness events. We organized them in a few other communities as well. My son was a surfer and loved to play the drums, and so we did a lot of that, and they helped us do that. Staying with them and being engaged with them was really helpful. Organizing some events for other folks whose families have struggled or are survivors of suicide through the American Foundation was helpful in other communities. Building Hope is pretty amazing what you've accomplished, and I've told Jen that before. So I think no matter where you are and what community, there is something, hopefully, but what Building Hope has been doing, I think, is setting the example that you can go actually deep into the community, where American Foundation is more about programs, which is very helpful as well. some of the other things I thought were really helpful is friends sharing his stories. And that was something we kind of did on our own. And I asked people, oh, would you send me a story about Dusty? And gosh, collecting those stories was good for them and was really helpful to do. And Heather, I just saw you nod your head. So I would encourage people to share stories. Don't be afraid to share stories with Heather of Toby and the difference he's made in the lives. It's so powerful. And repeating those stories to remind others of the difference they make, I think is really helpful.
Thank you. Heather, question is, are you able to have conversations with others who have attempted suicide, or is that a conversation that turns into anger relatively quickly?
No, I'm able to actually have those conversations. One of the things Toby always complained about is that everybody knew all of his misdeeds because I talk things out. I am here and willing to listen to those stories. Some of them give me insight as to some of the things he might have been doing or feeling or saying that take some of that burden off of me too, in saying, no, you know what? He wasn't thinking about the fight you just had. He was thinking about the pain he was in and ending that instead of thinking about being a burden to you. And so I'm happy to entertain those conversations. And I think it's important to have them and healthy. And I would hope that we incorporate some of the survivors in that aspect into future events.
Thanks, Heather. Casey, the question is, how often do people with suicidal thoughts actually speak out? People are noting that they're worried they're going to miss the signs. And so how often does this really come up that people are showing signs or speaking of suicide?
So, there's not solid research on this. So I'm going to talk about just my experience. And I'm going to actually rely on a lot of what Heather said in that video, is that they may not be showing signs to the person who is looking, but they possibly are showing signs elsewhere. And I think for so long in our culture, behavioral health, mental health, suicide has been viewed as a family problem, something where people don't get involved. We mind our own business. We don't ask questions. We don't share information. We don't share concern. And, I think Heather did a beautiful job in that video saying, we all need to be involved. This is a community problem. There are individuals that have information that maybe the person who is looking for signs doesn't see. And so, if you're talking with your kiddo and they're expressing concern about a friend, make it your business and, encourage your friends to look out for their friends. It's everyone's concern.
Erin, I'd like to add on to that I think I try to say a lot to people since Dusty died is to believe the person. I did not believe my son when he said he was considering suicide. I thought, oh, we've all struggled. We've all been there. I've had bad days. I didn't really think he was serious. And so, and that, I think that's okay. I've learned to forgive myself. But at the same time, people will tell someone else, they'll tell their friend, but the friend is afraid of making my friend mad. So I don't want to tell their parents. I don't want to tell their parents because then my friend will be mad at me. Well, then you're not really believing that there's a real possibility. Tell somebody. It's okay if they're mad at you. That means they lived. That means they survived it. And I'd rather Dusty be here and mad at me. And I was afraid he was going to be mad at me. Later, I found out he told a lot of people. So what I encourage people is, I don't know the difference to answer the person's question either. I don't know who is actually serious or not serious or what's the percentage. Don't worry about it. Tell somebody.
And maybe one more thing, because that I think is absolutely accurate and I think so important, and trust yourself. Because I think what we do is sometimes we have a thought about being concerned about someone, and then we talk ourselves out of that because we want to believe that everyone's okay, especially if it's a family member. And my thought is trust yourself and listen to that. And again, if it results them being mad at you, that's fine. Yeah, it's beautiful, Nancy. Thank you.
Yes, thank you both. I think that's so incredibly important. When I teach, I tell people to trust that gut instinct. It's there for a reason. Jen, are there any extra supports or outreach planned for the upcoming holiday season with COVID restrictions and financial stress, limited travel? People are really concerned about the community for the months ahead.
Yeah, so these are things that we have really been building all summer. So that includes our Connect and Reflect cafes, that includes our connecting events. So every month we have 4 to 6 events for adults. It could be everything. Last night we had sound healing. We have a writing workshop coming up. So these are opportunities. Not only at those events will you be introduced to building hope and connected with resources, but you will always learn some new tips and tricks for managing your own self-care or mental health or new good habits. And most importantly, there are deliberate opportunities to connect with one another and make that time a place that really is an opportunity, even though it's virtual, to reduce isolation. Because we've been working very closely with public health, we can still hold some of those events in person. I'll be just brutally honest in that we have not found a lot of people want to be at inside events right now. So most of them are virtual, but there will be a whole host of them for December. And we're actually working on some really specific for the holidays. I think what's important to know, though, is there are resources, whether it's a grief group, whether it is a Connect and Reflect cafe through your employer, or if you need a Building Hope scholarship, that these are things that are available all the time.
Thank you very much. Connor, what specific interventions are appropriate for teens who are experiencing suicidal ideation? And then Casey, you can jump into if you have any other thoughts.
So at the district, we have mental health staff at all schools that are trained to perform a suicide assessment if need be. So that's really if we identify a student that is in kind of that crisis mode, they'll first off not be left alone. So they're going to be with a staff member at all times until we can complete that assessment. And then we'll kind of use a screener and complete that assessment. And if there's any indication that they are a risk to themselves, then we will reach out and get them set up with hospitalization, whether that's through the SMART team in Summit County or through other providers. We really try and lean into some of our community partners for that too. But at the end of the day, one of the biggest things is that it's okay to talk about it. And, we really want to make sure that our staff know that at the school district is that, there's never a bad reason to ask, are you feeling suicidal? Are you having thoughts about killing yourself? Because it doesn't show that it has any increased risk of that person then following through on any of those thoughts, but instead it'll allow them to really get the help that they need to get help with, and then be able to move forward and kind of seek some treatment options as well.
Yeah, and to add to that, I love what Cutter just said is, old research and old ways of thinking was really supporting this idea of don't ask about it because then you'll give people ideas. And, the research couldn't be further from the truth. It's the exact opposite. So the more you ask, the more you can safety plan around it. In Eagle County, we work closely with the Hope Center, and that's our crisis co-mobile response. And they are trained experts in crisis assessment and crisis evaluation. And they work with individuals to identify the appropriate level of care that they need. That may be hospitalization, or it may be intensive outpatient, which is a 3-day-a-week program for 3 hours a day. Sometimes it's just individual therapy. Sometimes it's bringing in a family and talking about the support. So it's varying levels. And, I think it depends on the individual. But I do love this concept of not leaving someone alone. If you're concerned, don't leave someone alone because you want to be able to be with them until you get them to the right person that can do that assessment. And you already asked the question, and that's the most important part.
I just want to say too, I think that opens up the opportunity for people to get help. Oftentimes when someone's struggling with suicidal ideation, they're in a place when you are in deep, deep depression, your cognitive function is just so hampered. I always talk about my oldest daughter, really brilliant young woman. And when she was feeling suicidal and she came and told me that she was feeling suicidal and she needed help, she told me about her plan. She said, I know that when you, I just took mental health first aid, and I know when you make a plan that is become more serious. And she told me her plan, and her plan mathematically didn't work, just based on what she was going to do. And so it was confusing to me as someone new to addressing this kind of serious mental illness. Was it a cry for help? What was it? I knew it was a cry for help. I knew she needed more help, but I didn't know where to go. And one of the things that someone had given us was the Colorado Crisis Services number. And I will just be honest with you, when someone handed me an 800 number, I said, what on earth am I going to do with this? But the truth is, the Colorado Crisis number is actually a true crisis response. And a crisis could be everything from your daughter is having suicidal ideation to my kid is not talking to me right now and is refusing to go to school. So crisis is a very big thing. But what it is the phone number, and they are down in Denver off of Colorado Boulevard. It's staffed 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And there are licensed, trained clinicians on the other end of that line. Even more importantly, so there's a warm, loving person there to take your call. More also, they are connected to resources. So we at Building Hope have worked to give the people at Colorado Crisis Services all of the resources that I would tell you about at Building Hope. They have available in their database. And most importantly, they can also connect locally here with our crisis team. So in Eagle County, that is the Hope Center. In Summit County, it's the SMART team. We're very fortunate through Strong Futures that they have been able to start a team, and we now have 7-day-a-week coverage. Our hope is that we're 24/7 within the next year, but at least the hours from 2 until midnight are covered through the week. And what that means is when you call 911 because someone is in a crisis and you're very concerned about them, if you let them know it's a mental health crisis and you'd like to see that and ask to have the SMART team respond, instead of it being fire and ambulance and everything showing up, it will be a clinician and a deputy who's trained in crisis in an unmarked car, and they are not in uniform. So it's a very unthreatening thing. They are trained to deal with these situations. Since their inception, they have had over 250 calls. They've been able to stabilize over 70% of the people in place in the community and get them help. And even more importantly, at the end of the day, that doesn't just end there, because the next thing that happens is they give you the opportunity to work with their case managers. And so these are trained people who know where resources are good at helping people identify what it is they're struggling with. And they just know the world of mental health, where if there is intensive outpatient, like Casey was talking about, that someone can be connected with, if it's a peer program, if it's recovery, a residential recovery program in the Front Range. But those caseworkers can help do that. And what happens when you open these conversations and when you're able to have that moment of intervention, that is the opportunity and the place where hope comes in, because you can recover from these things. And I think that's really important when people are at their lowest place. Oftentimes they forget that there is hope. And one of our jobs as the loved ones around them is to offer that hope and let them know that we are there for them and that we care about them and that it matters that they're here.
Thank you all so much. I think that's very helpful, not just on a team level, but across the board, to how people can get help, and that help is different for everybody. Nancy, I'm going to start with you on this question, and then Heather, I'm going to come to you. But before I do that, Heather, I just want you to know, in case you hadn't seen this, when I asked about if you were willing to have a conversation with somebody who was thinking about suicide or who had attempted, a couple people jumped in and said that you had helped them. So thank you for that. Nancy, when your son died, did you feel like you were the victim, or how did you perceive your role after his death?
It's an interesting question. I remember the first week, I was just so mad. Like, I'm running around trying to get everything together for his service, and I was driving in the car and I had the programs, and I was like, I'm the mother. Like, somebody help me, because like everyone was, dealing with so much, but there was this moment of, this is my little boy. I'm his mother. How is it that life is still going on? I didn't think in that moment that I would, couldn't really see beyond. It's just so horrible that all these years later, I could be happy, that you can find peace, you can find your way. In that moment, it was, I just want to be his mother. He's 34, and I had been thinking lately, because he'd been going through a lot, that he was finally getting the age where maybe he would settle down, and he wouldn't need so much. But it was very difficult to figure out that role, because so as a mom, we plan the parties, we take care of this, we take care of that, we do this, we do that. I was surprised there's really nobody who does that for you when your son died. So I'm planning the event, I'm getting the programs, I'm ordering the flowers, and I didn't like it. I think there's an opportunity. Somebody needs to help and come alongside people and say, let me take care of that for you. I had a couple friends who did his video and other people who did things. And I thought, there's a real opportunity to serve here, because mom just needs to be mom. And people need to come alongside there. That was a typical time. Now I feel I am his champion and I am his voice. And as much as it's difficult, I find the courage to talk about everything, because he continues, the more I can talk about this bright, funny, silly, outrageously crazy, happy young man. If it can be him, and like it sounds like Toby, he wouldn't necessarily think of someone like him at his service. In fact, one of his dear friends said he was the happiest depressed person he ever knew. He didn't know that then it is possible with anyone. So now, as his mother, I am his champion, his voice. I will keep his story going, as hard as it is sometimes, but for him, I'm doing it for him, just as his mother should do. So complicated role, but I'm happy to do it.
Thanks, Nancy. Heather, how about you? Did you or do you feel a victim in your son's death?
No, not necessarily a victim. It wasn't so much, how could he do this to us? More guilty, more what if, more if onlys of, how did I miss? How did I miss the pain he was in? How did I miss the signs? Why wasn't I trained well enough to be able to ask those questions at the time? Having gone through a lot of reading, etc., you hear a lot that you've got to wear them out. You can't make them not come into your brain. And to be doing all of this in this pandemic, we haven't even really had the opportunity to have a full service. We've had a small one for family only, but I haven't seen the kids. I haven't seen his friends. I haven't seen many of the peers. In fact, there are probably people on this call now that this is the first time they've seen me since it's happened. And just like I said a little bit ago, he would be so furious that I was continuing to talk about him and his bad choices to eternity, but I'm going to, because if his story can save somebody else, I need to do that. I need to do that for me and as a way to honor his memory.
What a great way to honor both of your sons' memories. We're about out of time, but I want to give all of our panelists one more opportunity just for some final thoughts. Anything that's come up that you want to make sure that the group hears before we close out this evening. Any other information that you're just chomping at the bit to let everybody know. I'm going to start with Connor.
Thanks, Erin, and thanks everybody for coming. I think this is the first step, is just having these conversations, reducing that stigma, just bringing that awareness in. And from the school district, I think that would be our biggest ask, and kind of what I would leave with as well, is just focusing on that communication. I think that we want to be there as much as possible for your students, for your kids. We care so much about them. I feel like I see so many students every day that are so bright and gifted and talented, and we want to promote all of them to reach their full potential. But to do that, we have to work together. And so, we really want to be able to know what's going on outside of school, what's going on inside of school. How can we kind of get a whole picture of this kid and, both their physical and their mental health, kind of staying on top of making sure that we're there for those kids. At the end of the day. And I think that gets really hard with students that unfortunately need to go to a facility or be put on a hospitalization or a mental health hold, because sometimes that communication breaks down and then we kind of don't have the opportunity to provide all the supports we'd like to provide in school when those students come back. And so again, I think my biggest push is just communicate and don't be afraid to have the conversation and don't be afraid to ask us for how to have that conversation too. We have a lot of mental health professionals up here in Summit County. We have a lot that are employed by the school district, counselors, social workers, psychiatrists, and any of us are happy to tell you or help show you how to have that conversation with your kid, or to be there to have that conversation with your kid in school as well.
And Connor, one question that a couple people are asking is, how does somebody call in that mental health day or the excused absence for mental health, which was put into place by the legislature last year?
On that one, I don't actually have the best answer on our policy. So I'd love to follow up with that question. And I think that there's an opportunity for us to send some answers out for questions we're following up with later. So I'd love to include that as a response. I would say though, that just kind of being honest as well, we want to support everybody in taking those mental health days. We have started to recognize the power of them as professionals and adults too, but they're just as important for our kids. And if you need your kid to have a mental health day, that's okay. Just let us know and have them stay home, have them just focus on themselves and their self-care. And that's what's most important, because then they can come back and be ready to learn and be ready to engage. We'd much rather have a student that felt like they were capable of taking care of themselves and coming back than one that felt like they were in constant turmoil and anxiety while they're at school.
Thank you. Casey, final thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with Connor. Thank you guys all for coming. I want to start with that. And thank you to all of the panelists, to Heather and Nancy. Thank you so much for telling your story. Like Erin talked about at the beginning, I think the more conversations that we can have about shared experience, the better. And I think ask the hard questions and be prepared to support people through the answers, especially now, especially with COVID. If we look at research of quarantines or isolations with SARS or Ebola, that's similar to COVID-19, since nothing like this has happened before, a large majority, 75 plus of people who are isolated and quarantined or in public health orders like we are currently have behavioral health concerns. And so we're living in an interesting time where these hard questions are just going to become more and more and more important. So ask them. And if you don't feel comfortable with asking, don't stay silent, ask someone else to ask it. Thank you.
Jen, final thoughts?
Talk. Mental health is health. And in Summit County, we don't hesitate to talk about our knees, right? We want, I tore my ACL. Who are you going to see? We need to talk the same way we do about our knees and the Summit County crud that we have, the way we talk about our mental health. If you talk, you can connect. Don't be afraid to reach out. There's nothing to be ashamed of. Your brain is sick. If you're struggling with anxiety or depression or substance use, it really is a health issue. And so you need to know there's no stigma about getting help for yourself, and find hope. Talk to people, keep talking. Even if you don't get the responses that you want, sometimes people just don't know how to answer, but you need to keep talking and letting people know what you need. Building Hope is here for you. We're here for everyone in the community. We have scholarships, we have connecting events, we have other supports that we can offer. And we truly, I want to also remind everyone about the HYPE. Those are our youth events. They're targeted at youth ages 12 to 20. These are safe opportunities to connect, whether it's a BOEC ropes course or writing workshop, or hopefully this winter we'll be having a host of new things for people to explore, new opportunities around snowshoeing and skiing and fat biking and more. But really, we're trying to create more activities and places for our youth to connect safely, so that they can have some relief from some of the isolation. But most importantly, talk, and don't be afraid to reach out.
Thank you. Nancy, final thoughts?
A few. One, everyone struggles with things in life. Everyone. Something my son said, often was he was weird, he was different. Everybody thinks he's the life of the party as well. It's funny, outgoing. Oh, if only they knew what I was really struggling. Everyone struggles. Everyone has loss. Everyone's had their heart broken, disappointments in life. Everyone. You're not different in that way. The pain is real. Talk to your friend and you're going to find out. Oh, they had that same experience. So the more we can talk and share and listen, the more we understand. I've been there too. And so recognize, a friend we know often says life is hard. Life is hard. I wish I would have told my son that more often. It's hard. It's hard. It's okay. Get a friend, knuckle up, and get help. Ask somebody, because it is hard. I also really want to just remind, especially parents, forgive yourself. I forgive you. You're going to say things that are wrong. Your parents said things that are wrong to you. That's how you think of it. Anyway, they thought they were saying the right thing. Forgive yourself, forgive each other, forgive them, because everyone's trying their best. And I've worked hard at forgiving myself for all the what ifs that could have been. And as I tear up, I think, well, have I? No, I have. I do forgive myself. I could have done a few things differently, and so could Dusty, but just forgive. And then to hope for people. I would not have believed at all that I too, like, life is hard. I went through this terrible trauma. I have many other hard things that have happened. And here I am, and I'm okay. I've had fun experiences since Dusty died. Parents are more than their children, and their children are more than their parents. Like, we have full lives, and you can go on. Everyone, no matter what your losses are, you will find the happiness in life. You'll find the funny things. You'll laugh again. And so get through that hard moment and put arm in arm with your friends, and you'll be surprised years later that that was hard. And then share so that you can reach back and bring someone with you. It will be okay. And Heather, you will be there too. I'm so sorry.
We started with your story, Heather. I want to finish with your final thoughts as we close out this evening.
That one of the things we've learned through this, and especially even in my own grief pieces, is we're constantly telling people to reach out when you're in trouble. I think it's just as important for us to remember that when people are at their darkest, they don't have it in them to reach out, which means we need to be reaching in constantly. Check on your friends, check on your kids, even if it's goofy and awkward, check and just say, I love you. How you doing today? And just remember that those kind words and things may inadvertently save somebody and you don't even know it. Also, just it's okay to say their names. It's okay to remember them. It's not going to make us feel any worse. In fact, it makes us feel like others remember them too. Keep sharing those stories, whether it's been 6 days or 6.5 months or 7.5 years. Keep touching base, keep checking in, make them still be here, because I think of him every day. You're not gonna bring up sadness. Say his name. And don't be afraid to talk to me. Don't be afraid to talk to your parents. Parents, kids, we know a lot more than you give us credit for. We made it through our teens. I much rather would have had Toby be the one who said, Mom, I'm going to the party, and I'll call you if I'm in trouble and I need help, than to feel like he had to hide it and was sneaking out and doing all those things. We knew. Remember, your parents love you and they're here for you. They're not here to be adversarial. And kids, I love you too. I'm here. Call me anytime.
Sorry, my mute was not working correctly. Heather, I don't think you could have ended it any better. I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. I want to thank Building Hope, all of our panelists, people behind the scenes, Carol and Kellen and Juan and Tom, for all of their support. As we leave tonight, if you or somebody you know is in crisis, please reach out and get them help by calling Colorado Crisis Services at 844-493-8255 or text TALK to 38255. Thank you all again for joining us. Again, panelists and everybody for sharing their stories. The interactive chat and panel discussion was amazing. You are all so incredibly loved and needed in this world. I hope you have a great night.